Hi guys, Michelle here from RSVP, and I'm delighted today to be joined by travel expert Eoghan Corry. How are you doing, Eoghan?
All good. I'm looking forward to travel opening up at some level before the end of the summer.
Yes, it's all so exciting. So guys, we all know that the government is due to make an announcement on Friday about the next phased reopening of society and economy. And Taoiseach Micheál Martin has confirmed that there will be word on travel and the plan for the summer, basically. So guys, usual, leave your comments below and we'll try to get through as many as you can. So Eoghan, we'll get started. Now there's an announcement on Friday and there's lots of kind of rumours flying around. What do you think? What are you expecting that we will hear on Friday from the government?
Well, Michelle, it's not that difficult to work out what's happening. It's quite simple. Europe will open up. There's a set of timetables for different countries. Southern Europe already open, Portugal, Greece, Spain coming on June the 7th. Northern Europe probably a bit slower, but a key date is July the 1st. That's when the European Commission says everybody should be opening up without restriction, and that people who are vaccinated and people who are got the negative PCR test should be able to travel. They've introduced the green pass, the green certificate, and that starts the process. Now, what happens next in Ireland is more complicated because member states have 6 weeks to adopt this green certificate. The reason it's 6 weeks is last year all the states signed up or agreed to do things and then went off their 27 different directions. The issue in Ireland is that we are going to be much slower than everyone else. And the reason you see so many different dates for reopening, for instance, we had 3, if not 4 different dates for reopening in the morning newspapers this morning, is that people are making various calculations. July the 1st, key date, Europe says we open. When does Ireland kick in? Do we kick in at the end of the 6 weeks, or do we find further reasons to delay? I suspect, and this is just my take on it, is that Ireland will sit back, have a look, watch case rates, watch who's opening fastest, who's opening slower, and learning as much as we can before we do something that risks us, puts our indigenous, our own population here at risk. And that it will probably be in August before we get open, but that if everything goes without a mishap in Europe, I expect we will join in.
Great, sounds good. And tell me, so there's a lot of talk of vaccine certs and, green passports and stuff like that. Can you tell me how they would work? So like for fully vaccinated people, or if you've one jab, or how will they kind of work?
You're really going to need the fully vaccinated people to use this without question. The idea is that everybody vaccinated is going to be allowed to travel freely. It's pretty simple. It's going to be on your phone. It's a wonderful piece of technology. The people who scan in your boarding pass at the gate can just click on a little link off the boarding pass, and this green pass QR code will it can be scanned. And this is as it exists for Ryanair. See if you've had COVID documentation at the top. When you press COVID documentation, it shows your COVID cert. You've already scanned that in and uploaded it. And the most important word in the English language, negative. Now that's as it stands with Ryanair. You can run the video again just in case people didn't see it the first time. But the idea will be that where view COVID documentation is, your green certificate is going to be there. And instead of seeing your negative PCR test, you'll actually see a sign that you're vaccinated. That raises a major question. Not everybody's going to be vaccinated, particularly teenage children. It might be the vaccination age we got down past 40, maybe to 30. But when it comes to over 6, and Ireland's regulation is that everybody over 6 must show a negative PCR as we stand, they're not going to be vaccinated. And one of the big open questions is, when we start moving in numbers again this summer, will a negative PCR test still be required for teenage children and people in their early 20s who haven't been vaccinated? Some of the viewers here today will have seen those memes on the internet of all the grannies in Ibiza dancing on the table because they're the only ones allowed in. They're the vaccinated ones. It is a joke, but sometimes you wonder how true it's going to be. What will the vast majority of people in their 20s and 30s get to travel this summer, and will families get to travel without having to show a negative PCR test? That's a big deal because it's expensive. It's not the $6,000 question, it's the $89.99 question, because that's how much Randoc's PCR test costs at Dublin Airport at the moment.
Yeah, and just going back to the vaccine, like obviously they're going to give these vaccine certs and stuff to prove you've been fully vaccinated, but if you haven't, like, can they stop you from traveling?
Apparently the airline cannot. The airline has the power to deny boarding if they see there's a breach of immigration protocol. That's already given to airlines. For instance, people who are not Irish citizens travelling to Spain sometimes run into trouble, because if you're an Indian national, for instance, you probably need an extra visa to go into Schengen. That's the legislation that's in place at the moment, or the protocol that's in place at the moment. Countries have also emergency legislation which prevents people travelling. In Ireland's case, all but necessary travel is effectively banned, and that's the first thing that's going to have to be removed if this is going to get moving at all. If we don't move that, nothing happens this summer. But back to this point, will people have the right to stop you travelling if you're not vaccinated or don't have a negative PCR test? In theory, freedom of movement means that you can't. It's a breach of civil rights. But what we've seen since the beginning of COVID is that normal times have been abandoned. We can't even move 5 kilometres. So I don't see any difficulty if nations, and any obstacles in the way of nations that decide nobody's getting in without a vaccination or a negative PCR test. It's already the case in Ireland, not the case of vaccination, but negative PCR. We haven't recognised the vaccination yet. So I do see great difficulties. You will not really be taking to the skies this summer without either being vaccinated or a negative PCR test to a lot of countries. The next question is, it's going to be a Rubik's Cube of different regulations. We have 27 different countries. Southern Europe is really enthusiastic about everyone travelling. Obviously, Spain coming June the 7th, Portugal and Greece are already open. What happens in Northern Europe is they're less enthusiastic. And among the 27 countries, you could end up with a very confusing set of regulations. That is one of the things that Ursula von der Leyen had decided to address with this really amazing thing that happened where they put the European Green Certificate. She wants everyone to travel with the same rules. At the moment, some countries are 48 hours before for the test, some are 72, some allow PCR tests. Germany, for instance, allows antigen tests. So some of them are you have to be over 18, some over 16, under 16 don't need it. In our case, under 6 doesn't. So it's very confusing. They want them all to come together. And it's quite interesting that they managed to get the European Digital Cert up and running so quickly. In all my years watching the European Union, nothing happens fast in Europe, but they managed to get this on track very quickly. They put that 6-week deadline after July the 1st into place. Will countries miss it? I'm pretty sure they will. Will Ireland be one of the countries that miss it? I'd say we would be one of the favourites to drag our heels on this one, because we've dragged our heels on everything else related to international travel.
And which countries at the moment, you mentioned there Southern Europe is keen to kind of open up and welcome travellers again. So which countries at the moment are doing well with COVID and would be considered like safe to travel to on your holidays?
It's a very interesting one, because Portugal is the sort of the poster boy of Europe. We had our crisis in January. Everyone watching will know exactly what happened. We had about 100. Our total COVID since the beginning was 100,000 on January the 1st. It was 200,000 on February the 2nd. All our panic about international travel dates to those 4 weeks. Portugal went through a terrible time in February, and yet their 14-day 100K incidence rate is way, way down below ours. They went higher than us and they went back lower than us. And ours is around 120 at the moment, theirs is about 70, and some countries are a little bit lower. Regions within countries are also very interesting to watch. The Canaries are about 74, which is about 50 below us. The Balearics were one of the first to go quite low, but mainland Spain as well. So Valencia region is doing quite well. Greece, parts of Greece are Peloponnese Peninsula, that's doing very well. Northern Europe, not big holiday destinations, they've had a good firm record right through this. Iceland, Norway, Finland, Denmark even, they've had good records. Madeira is very good, but you can't get to Madeira, and Azores have closed off international travel, and they're very good at the moment. I would hold up Portugal, obviously they opened last week, and you can't miss, because we live in Ireland, we watch a lot of English television, we're exposed to a lot of English media, the big sort of rush to Portugal. And Spain is following on June the 7th. It will be interesting to know what the reaction to Spain dropping the requirement of a negative PCR test from June the 7th for countries with a particularly low COVID rate. We haven't reached that yet. We need to get our numbers down a little bit more. And I think for all of this to happen, we need a run of luck. And one part of that run of luck is that the source market, source market, which is Ireland rate, goes down enough to convince a country like Spain that it's not just vaccinated that you get in, but everybody will get in without a negative PCR. Otherwise, we're back in that situation I just talked about. We could end up with the 50, 40-year-olds being vaccinated, being allowed to travel, and people from their mid-30s and younger needing the negative PCR test. And that can, when you've got teenage children on top of that, can turn into a pretty expensive addition to your holiday. It can end up in the best part of €200 per person each way.
Yeah, it's not exactly cheap. And then alternatively, are there any countries in Europe that are kind of having a bit of a bad time at the moment with COVID, or are we kind of all on the same wavelength when it comes to travel opening up again, or is there anywhere that we will not be heading to, basically?
Yeah, the top of the chart, and the wrong end of the chart at the moment, is Sweden. Czechia were there for most of the last 3 months. They've got their rates back down under control. There's a couple of other countries that aren't doing particularly well. But interestingly enough, it goes in waves where somebody peaks outrageously and comes back and goes down quite low again. And we saw the Baltic states going through a bad time. We saw the Serbia, Hungary, Czechia region going through a bad time. The main sort of rump of holiday destinations have really held it together. The rates aren't very high across Southern Europe. Let's face it, the only two countries that 70% of Irish people go on holidays are Spain and Portugal. Turkey is an outlier because they're not in the European Union. They're worried, will they be included in any of this? A bit of a nightmare scenario. They're on the red list from Ireland at the moment. Anyone coming from Turkey needs to do mandatory hotel quarantine. And there is a new flight supposed to be starting to Antalya this summer from Ireland. The other problem with Turkey is that most of their local population have been vaccinated with the Sputnik vaccine, and that isn't recognised by the European Union. So I think it's not going to be a year for being adventurous, for going outside of Europe, long-haul travel. It's going to take a lot more negotiation, and what probably won't be happening. But for this summer to happen in any sense with holidays, we need the rates in Portugal and Spain to be low enough, and our rates to be low enough for a bit of trust on both sides, and the Irish government to get rid of their instruction, there's no other word for it, that the all but necessary travel is banned. It's effectively illegal not under international law, but under local law. And then for us to sign up to the green certificate, the green passport, without all the terms and conditions that we seem to want to apply when we signed up for the traffic light system last October.
Yeah, because there's a lot of talk about travel in the EU, but I want to ask you, when will the kind of talk about travel outside the EU? So like if we want to go to America, we want to go to New York, we want to go to Canada, the wider world, for lack of better phrasing, when do you think that'll start to open up?
We haven't even started that process. Oddly enough, Canada is very restrictive on Irish people coming in. America is very restrictive on Irish. You can't get in, let's face it, with an Irish passport. Returning Americans there's a large number of people who have American passports in Ireland. They can go in, but you're not going in if you've got an Irish passport. There are ways around it. One of the things that people have done is spent 14 days in another country and moved in, out from that other country where the entry restrictions aren't the same. I'll come back to that in a second, because that's a very interesting point that some people would be interested in from inbound into Ireland, how to avoid, for instance, mandatory hotel quarantine. You still do your quarantine of 14 days if you're coming, but you spend it in somewhere where you aren't confined to a hotel. That's a very obvious way of doing it without breaching the health guidelines. But America does have some hope that we will get some sort of corridor up and running. The facility to do so has already been opened up by Ursula von der Leyen when she talked about vaccinated Americans being welcome to come to Europe. They're not welcome to come to Ireland. Americans don't see it that way. They just see Europe as one great place with the same regulations. And if we decide to sign up for that, it will mean that vaccinated Irish and vaccinated Americans will likely be able to travel back and forth. It'll be certainly next year before long-haul travel comes back properly, but there is a possibility. And things can happen quickly in COVID. Rates can get out of control very quickly, but reaction to rates coming down can be quick as well. And we could end up with a situation where we have access to Americans have access here, which would be very important for our inbound tourist industry. Americans are gagging to travel to Europe, and Ireland is on their bucket list, and they see Ireland as a very safe destination. Our COVID rates since January have been plummeting. We're now probably the 8th or the 9th best in Europe, and it's a good relationship to have. Really important. We have the air routes in place. Michelle, the most interesting thing from the non-government, we're all waiting for the government to do, but from outside the government, aviation has kept its shape. The airlines have kept a very good schedule in place, a very ambitious schedule in place. If you look at the Aer Lingus website, they still have Los Angeles and San Francisco. They've lost Miami, we've lost Minneapolis, but we still have even Hartford, Connecticut. All those schedules are in place for this summer, waiting for the government to give them the go-ahead. Ryanair have those amazing choice of flights all in place. The frequencies are there to the trunk routes, for instance, Faro, for instance, Malaga. And unbelievably, we have 4 routes in the system that we didn't have in 2019. I mentioned Antalya with Turkish Airlines. Ryanair have a new route to Rhodes, which is waiting for the green light, waiting to go for the flight to wave. Aer Lingus have a new route to Santorini, which is waiting to go, and Aer Lingus Regional have Exeter ready to go. So aviation has kept its nerve, kept its shape, kept us connected, but there's nobody flying at the moment. None of those routes can start without the go-ahead of the government, and at the moment there are only about 20 flights departing Dublin Airport on a weekday. It would normally be 300. So we are seriously disconnected.
And speaking of airlines, we have a question in, speaking of airlines, and you mentioned all these new routes and stuff like that. Do you anticipate when things open up, will there be a jump in flight prices, or are we going to see flash sales for days? What do you think we're going to see?
I think that we're going to need flash sales. We're going to need good rates to get people moving. The reality is that all the surveys show a very big pent-up demand, Michelle. The other thing that could be showing up is that hotels have gone 12, 14 months without any income, and they might be trying to get the money back. Also, they have to invest. They've had to invest in lower capacity. In the hotels that have opened through the crisis tend to leave rooms for 2-3 days and give them thorough clean downs between guests for obvious reasons. So we could see hotel prices creep up. But I do think, to answer the question in one word, flash sales, yes. There are going to be incentives to get people moving again. How the consumer reacts, all we're relying on is surveys. You know, the airlines say there's been a good, strong series of bookings for the end of June, July. That might be a bit early in the game, but the airlines have had to be very flexible in what they offer. For instance, Aer Lingus have a no change fee policy to the end of the year. That's really generous. I mean, airlines don't do that for peak summer seasons ever. And Ryanair haven't got the same flexibility through the summer. They're still protecting that peak yield, July and August, where they're going to have to start making money back. They recently lost €814 million. So but that flexibility will be pushed forward if the bookings don't show up in the system. How is the consumer going to react? It looks like we're all going to be jumping out of the stalls like cattle that have been kept in for the winter. You know those videos on the internet where they're all let out in the field and they dance around. We're all going to be a bit like that. But will we be confident enough to book? The experience of the travel industry is that it's amazing how many people who are afraid to book a flight for €200, all the fear disappears and the same flight is €20.
Yeah, because I was just about to ask, Eoghan, finally, is it wise to book a holiday right now? Should we wait for more guidance? What would your advice be? When do we book if we want to go abroad?
My advice is not to book indiscriminately, but to book where you see terms and conditions that are pretty, that you've got, if things go wrong, you'll get your money back. Very simple. Let's avoid. And that means avoiding, for instance, off these online tour operators that you get abroad, Love Holiday, Kayak, all of these people. It means going, the traditional travel agent is a great place to go. They know exactly where your money is going and the track that it'll come back. Whereas sometimes on the internet, you won't, the channel of which way the money goes and how it's going to get back to you should anything go wrong aren't as clear. Booking direct on the website, absolutely yes. Aer Lingus, Ryanair, the two airlines that count out of Ireland, once they have your full details and your proper email address, that money will come back to you. But don't book, but look at where, follow the money, Jerry Maguire, show me the money. You follow the money and you actually work out as you're sending money to these people that the channels to have it returned are clear and that the terms and conditions, you know, that people are offering you are that it will come back. The country is drowning in vouchers, Michelle. We've got some people have thousands of euro vouchers from trips from last year, maybe more than one trip or a family trip from last year. So a lot of those have to be redeemed as well. It's going to be difficult working out how your redeemed vouchers, the validity of them. There's an awful lot of management of that has to be gone through this summer. That's why it's really important that at an early stage, we get a smell of what is permissible from the Irish government, for people travelling abroad, and the places we're travelling. And luckily enough, Europe hasn't been great in this crisis. In fact, they allowed everyone do their own thing. We effectively threw Italy under the bus at the start of this when their numbers started rolling upwards. Luckily enough, Europe has taken a lead in it. The question is, when will the other countries follow that lead? And the big question for us all here, Ireland, very, very conservative NEFID, advising a very, very nervous government. Will we just sort of duck out of what's happening with international travel as we have done in the past, or will we participate at some level?
I suppose we'll just have to wait and see. Listen, Eoghan, thanks so much for speaking to us today. We got through loads of information there, and thanks again for speaking with us.
Always a great pleasure, Michelle, and everybody. I hope we are all travelling soon, and I meet you all at the airport.